Support for On Point comes from Viking, committed to exploring the world in comfort, offering small ship experiences with a shore excursion included in every port and programs designed for cultural enrichment. Learn more at Viking.com. And Seed. Seed's DSO1 is a 24-strain, 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic, engineered to survive digestion, support healthy regularity, and promote whole body health. Learn more at seed.com/public.
You're back with On Point. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty, and Heather Cox Richardson is here. She is author of the newsletter Letters from an American, author of many books on history as well, including one also called Letters from an American. And we are talking about the facts and true story around the enshrined concept of birthright citizenship in this country. And Professor Richardson, I just do want to dig in a little bit more into the case of Wong Kim Ark, because as you note in your letters, he is a U.S. born citizen around early to mid 1870s.
Right, we don't know exactly.
Of Chinese parents. He actually did return to China in 1889 when his parents went back.
That's right. They repatriate. The whole family goes back. He marries. And then he comes back to the U.S. and does not have a problem. Then he goes back to see his newborn son and to see his wife again. And when he tries to come back in, then they stop him and say, "You are not a citizen." And he says, "Yes, I am." And there have been a number of cases, by the way. He wasn't the only one who sued over this, but he's the case that goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court looks at the case in this moment, which I have to add is a moment of extraordinary hysteria against Chinese immigrants to the United States. And they say that, listen, even if you don't like Chinese immigrants at this point, you cannot overrule the Constitution, which says he is a citizen. So Wong Kim Ark became sort of that gold standard of this is we are going to embrace birthright citizenship going forward. And that's stood ever since. Again, very different than who can come in from another country, but who is here.
It's interesting. I've pulled up the majority opinion from the case, Justice Horace Gray. It's so fascinating because here's part of what he wrote. As appears upon the face of the 14th Amendment, as well as from the history of the times, this was not intended to impose any new restrictions upon citizenship or to prevent any persons from becoming citizens by the fact of birth within the United States. It is declaratory in form, or declaratory in form, and enabling and extending in effect. I mean, the justice there is saying it is what it is. Yeah. In the 14th Amendment. There's no other way to interpret it.
Which is interesting because, as I say, this is a period when you have a real push among some people in the American West to get rid of the 14th Amendment because they don't like the idea of Chinese immigrants being treated equally to white Americans in the West. They don't care very much about black Americans in the West in this period, but they're tied in knots over Asians. And so, this is not just about black citizenship. It's also about citizenship for anybody coming in.
Do you know what's interesting to me? You know how you mentioned when we were talking about the current objections to under the jurisdiction thereof in the 14th Amendment? We heard Charles Cooper a little bit. In the Wong Kim Ark decision, 1898, again, there's another section in which the majority decision takes this on, like, just square on, when he says the real object of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, in the qualifying words of all persons born in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, would appear to have been to exclude. That's what he's saying. It looks like it does. But it does not, in fact. It says, it has already been shown by the law of England and by our own law from the time of the first settlement of the English colonies in America, there have been recognized exceptions to the fundamental rule of citizenship by birth within this country. But then he says those principles, those exceptions were long ago distinctly stated by this court. And he's saying only diplomatic exemptions, actually, no others. And I kind of hashed my way through that, but this seems to have been resolved by the courts 130 years ago.
Well, it was, but let's take it from the other direction. Okay. And that's that why are we talking about this again the way we are? And it's worth remembering that Trump's MAGA Republicans are a political project. Not thinking this is sort of about the principles of citizenship, which are important. I mean, that's really, thinking about what it means to be an American and what the government should do for Americans and that Americans should do for the government and so on. Those are vital questions at every moment. But in this moment, we've had the rise in the United States of this radical right movement, and much of its power has come from fear of the other, from fear of the immigrants coming in. And this is, of course, a pattern that Viktor Orban used in Hungary to seize power and to destroy democracy there. But in the United States, especially after COVID, we did have an extraordinary swell of people coming from over the southern border, in part because the United States economy was the strongest in the world. So if you had countries like Venezuela where the economy was tanking, and many of the other Latin American countries where the economy was not good, they kind of squeezed the migrants that were in those countries out. And so this is why we had, for example, Haitians at our border, is they began to come over the border to try and find work in this country where, in fact, we had a shortage of workers, if you recall. So that weird push after COVID, the weird numbers of people coming in after COVID, really were fuel for this political movement. And they continue to be fuel for that political movement because anti-immigrant sentiment has always been present in the United States. And it's just something that in this moment, this particular president is really doubling down on in order to solidify his base at a time when, his numbers are actually not terribly strong. And one of the big things he had going for him was that when he talked about being harsh against immigrants, that really goosed his base. It's actually not doing that any longer, but he's still doubling down on it because, it's not clear he's going to be able to regain any ground on the economy. And he's underwater on every single other issue. And we're only 102 days in.
I hope you don't mind me asking you a question that removes us from the realm of history and just more sort of your view on, well, no, this is what you write about the uniqueness of the American project. Because I think one thing that the Trump administration and Trump supporters and he himself points to is that this idea of birthright citizenship is actually not the norm globally. That you could probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, probably point to more places where you can be born in a country, but you still have to go through a long process in order to be a citizen thereof. And so therefore, they're saying, well, we should have that here too, so that we have the quote unquote right kinds of citizens. I mean, what do you think about that?
One of the things that frustrates me so in this moment is the people who claim to be defending America are destroying it and destroying its uniqueness and its greatness. I will say that America has always been different because and I'm not saying that we have never made mistakes. Of course we have, sometimes more often than not. But we were a country where you could come from anywhere and become an American. And, somebody made the point recently that I think it's 46% of the people who are running the Fortune 500 companies, I think it is, are either immigrants or children of immigrants, but they're American. And that idea that America is about what you believe in and hard work and being able to create your own future is what has always made America so vibrant and so exciting and so different than other countries where citizenship depended on your religion or your descent or any of those sorts of things that are not, they're not about self-determination. And that destruction of that, the idea that we want to go to a situation like that is, it seems to me, making what has been just an extraordinary country into a very small one. I mean, why are we taking orders from Hungary?
And the way this sort of trying to reshape the idea of what America is, the way it's playing out in the lives of individual Americans is disturbing and weird. We talked about those the children and the U.S.-born children who had been deported along with their mothers. I was just reading that this week, for example, Adam Pena, he's a California attorney and a U.S.-born citizen. He's an immigration attorney. His family has been here for more than a century. They're as American as you can get. He received a letter from DHS to self-deport. And he's like, where would I self-deport to? We have been living here for 100 years. We are Americans. And he told a San Diego news station that he thinks that this is an intimidation tactic because he's an immigration lawyer and some other of his fellow immigration lawyers have received similar letters. But nevertheless, I mean, it is an intimidation tactic. An intimidation against the core idea of one's Americanness. And so to that point, actually, there's been some attempted action on Capitol Hill this week. Democratic Representative Pramila Jayapal of Washington went so far as to she's a Democrat, introduce an amendment to ensure that taxpayer dollars cannot be used by ICE to detain or deport U.S. citizens. And here's what she said on the House floor just 2 days ago.
ICE has zero authority to even detain U.S. citizens. As ICE's own policy states, quote, as a matter of law, ICE cannot assert its civil immigration enforcement authority to arrest and or detain a U.S. citizen.
Okay, so that's her proposed amendment. And here is a follow-up comment from Democratic Representative Ted Lieu of California.
The fact that Democrats and my colleague, Representative Pramila Jayapal, feel the need to even introduce an amendment that says ICE cannot deport U.S. citizens is bat crazy. This should not even be a discussion. It is not even a question. U.S. citizens cannot be deported by ICE. It's the law, it's the Constitution. I will be astounded if Republicans vote no on this.
Okay, so let's listen to the roll call for how the vote went.
Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Schmidt votes no. Mr. Grothman? Mr. Grothman votes no. Ms. Hageman votes no. Mr. Moore votes no. Mr. Harris votes no. Mr. Gooden votes no.
The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 11 ayes and 12 noes.
The noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman?
Who seeks
So,
recognition?
Representative Jayapal's amendment that ICE cannot deport U.S. citizens using taxpayer dollars was voted down by Republican members of the House.
Well, there's even something more, I think, of concern to American citizens right now, and that's what happened in Oklahoma City a couple of weeks ago when ICE agents and people who claimed they were ICE agents and U.S. Marshals and members of the FBI, although the Marshals and the FBI have said they were not involved, although they knew it was going to happen, broke into a house and trashed the house and took the cell phones, the laptops, and all the money that was there, which was the family's life savings, because they had a search warrant to go into that house to look for undocumented immigrants. But in fact, the people that they were looking for had moved out of the house, and the people who were there were U.S. citizens who had just recently arrived from Maryland. And, you know, they sent the kids out, the teenage daughters outside in their underwear in the rain with their mother while they did this to the house. And the mother kept saying, we're U.S. citizens, we're U.S. citizens, and then left them with, you know, again, no way to contact anybody and no money and no card to know where they could get those things back. Now, that idea that we can go after U.S. citizens with our immigration and customs enforcement law enforcement officers to look for undocumented immigrants, you know, that puts every single American citizen at risk. And as you say, I think that's an intimidation factor. But I think it's also this idea that unless you are on the side of a particular political party, so that you're not going to be intimidated, that you're going to be pushed outside of the people who get to have rights in the United States. Yeah. And that's a much bigger, as I say, political project that would redefine America.
Okay. 1866, 1868, 1872, 1898. I mean, over and over and over again, every time this question of if you are born in the United States, are you or are you not a citizen? This country has basically unanimously fallen on the side of yes, you are a citizen. You do have that birthright. And what's fascinating to me, you also wrote a book about the Republican Party pre and post Civil War. That was all championed by the Republican Party in the 19th century. And that party is not existent
That's correct.
anymore.
Yeah.
It's the party of Donald Trump.
That's correct, yeah.
And I want to just end this last few minutes, and I want to hear what you have to say about this by stealing an idea from your letter on birthright citizenship, because it's not even the party of Ronald Reagan anymore. You pointed out that in Reagan's last speech, January 19th, 1989, his last speech as president, he actually thought about what makes America so great, and he did so by recalling a letter he had recently received.
You can go to live in France, but you cannot become a Frenchman. You can go to live in Germany or Turkey or Japan, but you cannot become a German, a Turk, or Japanese. But anyone from any corner of the earth can come to live in America and become an American.
Professor Richardson, I'm going to give you the last word on here, but let's listen to a little bit more about why Reagan wanted to point this out.
We lead the world because, unique among nations, we draw our people, our strength, from every country and every corner of the world. And by doing so, we continuously renew and enrich our nation. While other countries cling to the stale past, here in America, we breathe life into dreams, we create the future, and the world follows us into tomorrow. Thanks to each wave of new arrivals to this land of opportunity, we're a nation forever young, forever bursting with energy and new ideas, and always on the cutting edge, always leading the world to the next frontier. This quality is vital to our future as a nation. If we ever closed the door to new Americans, our leadership in the world would soon be lost.
Ronald Reagan on January 19th, 1989.
And it's an important piece there because he was actually saying that at a ceremony to honor George Shultz and the other person to whom he was giving the Medal of Freedom. So he kind of goes off script. I mean, obviously it's written, but he kind of goes off script to insert into that speech honoring them this piece that is clearly his final word. He even says, this is the last speech I'm going to give, and this is what I want to say. That, I think, is significant because he recognized the importance of how we define America, and in order to keep it alive and vital and growing. And as I say, you know, this place where anybody can come and be an American, which has always been what made America great, was so important to him that he needed to say it one last time in that particular moment.
Heather Cox Richardson, she's author of the newsletter Letters from an American, has a book by the same title, a professor of history at Boston College. Professor Richardson, it is always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. This is On Point.
On Point is a production of WBUR Boston and is distributed by APM, American Public Media.
Support for On Point comes from BetterHelp, committed to making mental well-being a priority and offering support in taking on everything life demands, with therapists available to communicate via video, chat, or phone at betterhelp.com/public. And the Mehrotra Institute for Business, Markets, and Society, hosting the Is Business Broken podcast, featuring conversations with academics, industry leaders, and politicians. More at ibms.bu.edu.
11:58. Good Friday morning. KUOW FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, KQOW Bellingham. Stay with us. We have the news in review coming up next, starting at noon with Bill Radke. Hi, Bill.
Guy Nelson, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Colleague
too.
of what? How long? 30 years or something like
so,
that?
Yeah.
Good to see you, Guy. We're going to, on Week in Review, talk Washington State's legislative session. Did Washington tax the rich? And if not, why not? And how did our new governor do in this first session? The Seattle Police Department's hiring officers again, much more than before. We'll talk about why and to what effect. We'll ask, I will ask our panelists what made them smile. So that's a little flavor of what's coming up, Guy.
Support for KUOW comes from Concerts West and Hans Zimmer, presenting The World of Hans Zimmer, A New Dimension, October 10th at Angel of the Winds Arena. A full live orchestra performs Zimmer's scores synchronized with film sequences from Dune, Interstellar, The Lion King, and more. More information at worldofhanszimmer.com.
The following is a weekly required test of the emergency alert system. This has been a required weekly test of the emergency alert system.
Support for KUOW comes from Third Place Books. British naturalist Robert Macfarlane discusses his new book, Is a River Alive, with David B. Williams on Thursday, June 12th at 7 p.m. Tickets and details available at thirdplacebooks.com.
66 degrees in Seattle. News headlines are next. It's 12:01.
Bottom line, especially if they make chemicals, fertilizer, and equipment more expensive.
You know, it's just a government interference into the markets that affect our lives every day.
Kagi says he hopes public backlash over tariffs will push Republicans to once again embrace free market principles like they did before Trump became the GOP's leader roughly a decade ago. For NPR News, I'm Jason Rosenbaum in St. Louis.
NPR and PBS say they will challenge President Trump's executive order that directs the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's board to stop federal funding for the major public broadcasters. NPR's David Folkenflik reports it's not clear that the president has the authority to do that under the law.
No government official can dictate what public broadcasters spend their money on once they've received it. So when President Trump says, he puts out an edict in this executive order saying CPB must cease funding NPR and PBS and basically tell any public broadcasters on the local level that receive their funds that they can't send money back to the big networks, that would seem to be in violation of congressional law.
NPR's David Folkenflik. The order also instructs the Federal Communications Commission and other agencies to investigate, quote, whether NPR and PBS have engaged in unlawful discrimination, referring to the network's DEI policies. Rights groups say a drone has struck a ship carrying aid to Gaza today off the coast of Malta. NPR's Hadil Al-Shalchi has the latest.
The vessel was carrying volunteers from over 21 countries, according to the group Freedom Flotilla Coalition. 12 crew members and 4 civilians were attempting to take food and other supplies to Gaza. The strike came just after midnight on Friday, and video posted online showed red flames engulfing a boat. The Maltese government said there were no casualties. The Israeli army did not comment. Israel has blocked all aid, including food, from entering Gaza for 2 months now. It says it's a tactic to pressure Hamas to accept a new deal to release more hostages. In 2010, Israeli troops stormed a Turkish ship carrying aid to Gaza. 9 people were killed on board. Hadil Al-Shalchi, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
The government's latest big jobs report shows a cooling but resilient market against the backdrop of trade wars and government-wide cuts. The Labor Department says the U.S. economy gained 177,000 jobs in April. That's fewer than the downwardly revised 185,000 jobs created the month before. The unemployment rate in April held steady at 4.2%. U.S. stocks are trading higher this hour. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 534 points, or 1.3%, at 41,287. The S&P is up 82 points, 1.5%. And the Nasdaq has risen 1.5%, or 272 points. From Washington, this is NPR News.
This is KUOW News. I'm Noelle Gasca in Seattle. Drivers around North Bend might get a heads up about approaching emergency vehicles as the Washington State Patrol tries out a new early warning system. The safety cloud system will send alerts to drivers' phones and some cars' dashboards when emergency vehicles are on their way or stopped up ahead on the road. The idea is to give drivers extra warning to pull over or slow down. The State Patrol says that early warning can reduce the risk of colliding with an emergency vehicle by 90%. The North Bend pilot project starts in June, and the State Patrol will evaluate whether to expand the alert system to other parts of the state. The Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center laid off employees this week. A spokesperson for the nonprofit said many of the cuts were due to an IT reorganization. Andrea Galvan spent 6 years as a business systems analyst for Fred Hutch.
I think for the first time in my career, I truly loved my job and I loved, to go to work.
She estimates that about 30 employees in her department were laid off. Fred Hutch said it also cut some positions related to HIV research. Those cuts are a result of shrinking federal grant funding for HIV-related work, and the spokesperson said none of the layoffs will affect patient care. And you can now catch a free shuttle ride to the Seattle waterfront. The free shuttle service will operate from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily and will make stops between Seattle Center and the King Street Station every 15 minutes. You can take a closer look at the pickup route by going to seattlewaterfront.org. The service is expected to be available until at least Labor Day. It's 66 degrees in Seattle's U District right now, with an expected high of 70 later today. Tonight, showers likely with a low of 48 degrees. There's a slight chance of rain Saturday morning with cloudy conditions expected later in the day. This is KUOW News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Progressive Insurance with its Name Your Price tool, a way to see coverage options based on a driver's budget. Learn more at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's A Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. You are a busy person, I reckon, so you only have so much time to follow the week's news and figure out what happened and what you think about it. So this is where we come in, we sit down and spend an hour together and talk about what this week even was. And I'm with contributing editor at the Urbanist, Ryan Packer. Ryan, thanks for coming on.
Happy Friday. Great to be here.
Happy Friday. We're with Seattle Channel host and producer Brian Callanan. Welcome back, Brian.
Great to be here, Bill. Thanks.
And also Seattle News,
Views and Brews.
And Brews.
Your coffee break political podcast. Thank you.
That's it. Yeah, I enjoy you on that show. Executive Director for the Center for Latino Leadership. Welcome back, Maia Espinoza.
Thanks for having me back, Bill.
I see you over there, over my giant computer contraption. You can see us, too. You'll probably have a better view of Maia than I do if you just go onto YouTube. Brian's waving at you. We're friendly people. Just search KUOW Public Radio, and you can watch the show if you're so inclined. Okay. What happened this week? Topic number one, I want to know, did Washington State tax the rich? When lawmakers gathered, starting in January, we had a new governor, we had a bouncing new budget deficit, a thriving budget deficit, and a strapping budget deficit. Sure. And a lot of Democrats wanted a new wealth tax or a new state payroll tax on big employers, maybe a bigger capital gains tax, a higher property tax limit, and I know property might not equal rich, but it's generally richer than not having property. But Governor Ferguson told the legislature, now, don't overdo it on the taxes. Brian, lawmakers did pass something like $4 billion in new taxes over 2 years, $9 billion over 4 years.
Right.
So there are new taxes, but would you say that the legislature taxed the rich or didn't?
Not directly. The wealth tax was the big avenue that I think Democrats were very hot on from the beginning. They really based a lot of their initial budget on wealth tax money coming in. And this would be a tax on stocks or intangible assets of people that are worth more than $50 million, okay? That didn't happen.
Like 4,000 Washingtonians, something like that.
There aren't that many, but the governor was not happy about that. It's an untested tax. It certainly would be taken to court. And he said, rather than banking everything on making it happen with this wealth tax, which you don't know if it's going to work or if people are going to move out of town or whatever else, rather than do that, let's try to ratchet it down and figure out some other answers. So I think what the legislature did is they spread a lot of taxes over a lot of different areas. I will say, though, of this $9 billion we're talking about, a little bit more than half of it comes from business tax hikes. And this is an important point to realize here. I will say, when it comes to taxing the rich, there was this House Bill 2081 that was talking about this and taxing these different businesses. It does take a special aim on service businesses that have annual taxable revenue exceeding $5 million. Is that the biggest business? Maybe not, but it's a bigger business. And they're saying, all right, let's increase that tax rate from 1.75% to 2.1. So I think there was at least some idea to try to go after some of these bigger businesses here and try to bring in some different dollars here. But did they go after a wealth tax? No. Do we still have a tax system that's pretty regressive in this state in terms of people of lower income paying more in a percentage in taxes? Yes, we do.
I mean, no one's happy with this budget. Zero people. You show me someone who's
Zero people happy.
Yeah, it cuts a lot and it adds taxes. But we talk a lot about the regressivity of our tax system, and we have the second most regressive tax system in the country. But we don't talk a lot about the regressivity of cuts. And so when you look at what they had to cut to kind of get within the budget that the governor was going to be okay with, we're going to cut support for four-year colleges, universities, community college, financial aid. Are those cuts going to be regressive? Yes, they're going to be borne more by poorer people than richer people.
Maya?
I think Democrats achieved their goal this year by raising taxes yet again. I mean, the increase in state spending is higher than the economic growth in the state. So that to me is not super sustainable or a good sign. The fact that nobody really is happy with this budget, I do think, of course, is a good sign. When, nobody's super happy or feels like they really got what they wanted, that shows that there was a lot of compromise that went into this. So I was happy to see that.
Unhappiness makes you happy.
No.
Oh. Well, I know what you mean. Josh.
I guess in looking at it, this was something that the Democrats definitely pushed through. When you look at the different bills that were out there, the Democrats, all of them in the Senate, said, yes, we're going with this budget. But in the House, there were 6 Democrats who, along with Republicans, said no to it. So when you talk about not everyone being happy, I think, yes, we're definitely talking about that on both sides of the aisle here. I will say, of the different proposals that were out there, I know a number of Republicans were talking about a flat budget. Let's not increase spending, et cetera. Let's not increase taxes. However, I did want to look at that and just kind of take a look at what's been happening over the past several years, which is we have a number of employees out there, state employees in particular, and this is an important part of the budget here because a lot of it is based on these different salaries. If we're going to have these people here and consider any sort of a cost of living increase, let's say, then it's a situation where you have to increase the budget to pay for that amount. Now, did that amount go up more than some people wanted? Definitely there. But I think that's a piece of this that maybe not a lot of people were looking at, where originally the governor was talking about, how about maybe a furlough day for some of our state workers? That did not happen. So that was a big win for labor and state workers, and that's a big part of the budget increase, I think, are those salaries, and it's important to point that out.
I think, the one thing, listening to Governor Ferguson talk about the need to kind of be cognizant of what's happening in Washington with the Trump administration, it doesn't really match sort of what needs to happen on the ground. We just saw the new budget that was announced by Trump today would include $163 billion in cuts. Many of those things are going to have to be made up for at state government, but he wasn't really willing to offer any real proposals around how to actually do that.
Well, when you think about the average worker, not the state worker, I don't think they're real happy with this budget. I mean, state workers got their increases. The average worker now is going to see that or realize that regressivity in taxation, in the form of the gas tax increase. And I mean, even B&O taxes are passed on to the consumer in so many ways. So I think your average consumer in this state is not very happy with how this panned out. I think, Ferguson did the right moves and Democrats played the right cards to keep state workers and, union workers, reliable Democrat voters happy. So I think, again, this plays out to be a win in the Democrats' favor, but it is concerning long term, given the fact that our economic growth doesn't match our spending.
I will say just transportation budget is its own monster in a lot of different ways. Right. And that 6-cent gas tax increase was a bipartisan measure. So we had Republicans and Democrats supporting it because it's really difficult for them to rely completely on gas tax with fewer people cars with better mileage and electric vehicles on the road, et cetera. So that's one thing. I will say back on that whole deal of federal funding, I think this is something that the governor is really concerned about because somewhere between 28% of our state budget is reliant on federal funds. So when we talk about a reduction of any sort there, this is what's going on in the back of Governor Ferguson's mind, the old state chess champion back in the day, right? He's trying to figure out what that next move is going to be. And if indeed it turns into a situation where sometime later this summer, oh no, there's a cut in federal funding, maybe there's some legal back and forth that they can try to get back some of that funding. But at the same time, it's a very difficult decision process to be in because I think there's some uncertainty there as to where that budget is really going to lie. And if indeed it would put our budget out of alignment, which would mean a special session or the governor putting a lot of vetoes in place.
Well, since we brought up transportation, Ryan, and that's something you focus on a lot. That's a different budget from the operating budget. But we said that the gas tax is going up 6 more cents, up to 55.4 cents a gallon starting this summer. What did you think of the transportation budget overall?
I think that this is an area where me and Maia are probably going to agree the most, which is the 6-cent gas tax increase stinks. And it mainly stinks because of what they're going to use this money for, which is primarily to get a handful of very large highway expansion projects across the finish line. We're talking the North Spokane corridor. We're talking the Puget Sound Gateway between Seattle and Tacoma. And so they're doing that while they're basically keeping maintenance and preservation money consistent, not increasing that a lot, even though we're funding about half of the current need. We have that Carbon River Bridge into Mount Rainier just shutter almost probably permanently recently because we're not maintaining what we have. And so they decided to, once again, double down on this need to focus on new infrastructure over existing.
Isn't some of that new infrastructure, though, already delayed projects that should have been on the books a long time ago and we kicked the can down the road?
I mean, I would see that as a benefit because we know the climate impacts of these projects. And so the fact that we haven't yet built the North Spokane corridor should be a great boon to our state because we don't have to put bad money after good, but we're going to do that anyway.
I would say, speaking of climate, the Climate Commitment Act, we talk about 6 cents per gallon. That, of course, to your everyday consumer paying $4.50 a gallon is like 6 cents is okay, fine. We're already, but no, in reality, the CCA is causing, tens of cents at a time increases. And according to a recent study by the Washington Policy Center, as much as 40 cents per gallon next year is anticipated on top of that 6 cents. So, that consumer is really, feeling the squeeze. And between the Tesla tax now and everything else, I mean, your person that has to commute for work, that has to go those long distances, that has jobs all over, the region and is not, able to take mass transit is really feeling the pinch with this kind of, transportation budget.
Note to listeners, the Tesla tax, meaning one of the things Washington State did in this session is to tax the emissions credits that EV makers, and we're talking mostly about Tesla, have been piling up because of a Washington State law that said that the makers of gas-powered cars have to pay those emissions credits to the Teslas of the world.
Right. And Tesla just happened to be the only one that had those credits available or something like that. So it became known as this Tesla tax.
Well, that's because Tesla is not a car company. They're a carbon credit company.
There you have it.
I guess I will say on these different projects that we're talking about, some of these mega projects, it's really interesting to see when they come together or when they get delayed, for example, because when they get delayed, those costs go up so much. I mean, we're talking about doubling in some cases when they're delayed even for a couple of years. So I think this is something that our state has an eye on. And so they're trying to deliver on these promises they made. Hey, we're going to, build a new 520 and things of this nature. And then when the economics of it catch up to them down the road for a number of different reasons, I think inflation is one of them, sure. But when those catch up there, then it turns into a project that it's just very onerous to complete. I think that's a piece of this too.
Let's talk about, since we're still talking taxes, Brian, the legislature is letting local governments impose a new sales tax for anything related to criminal justice. So not just cops, but prosecutors too, but also public defenders and diversion away from jail and homelessness reduction and behavioral health, things that touch on criminal justice and public safety. It just seems like quite the Swiss Army knife for local governments.
It is, and there's an interesting backstory to this. So we're talking about a 0.1% increase involved here. And this is interesting for a few reasons, because I think initially a lot of Democrats were coming into this session saying, hey, this property tax cap, this 1% cap that is on all the cities out there, you can't raise these property taxes by more than 1%. A number of cities, Seattle included, went down to the legislature and said, hey, that isn't even close to what inflation is doing here. We need to have a bigger range there. Give us 3% maybe from year to year. The legislature went through that. The governor was not happy about that idea, so they kept it to 1%.
Yep.
I feel like this is almost a little bit of a, what's the right way to put it? An answer to some of those cities that might be concerned.
Were you about to say a cheat?
No,
Okay,
I was not saying that.
answer.
I was not saying that.
Okay.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing in some ways. I guess what I'm saying is a lot of the cities are feeling the pinch because of different budget issues. Seattle is certainly in that situation, $240 million in the hole here. King County's in a situation like that too with a budget deficit. So I think with this 0.1% sales tax increase going towards public safety, which, as we know, talking about the city of Seattle and hiring police officers, which was in the news this week, they got a lot more cops they need to pay. So if the city can find some way to, and Mayor Harrell said he would be looking at this, if the city can find some way to use that 0.1% to actually go towards these different officers, then that might free up money in other parts of the budget where they can pay for the things they want.
Because money is fungible, so you get to spend that money someplace else.
I think that phrase is going to be tested over the next couple of months here and into the fall. But this is something Seattle's interested in, and the county. When you talk about the issues they've had with the jail, et cetera, this is something a lot of local governments are going to take a close look at.
Brian, this is actually a question I don't know the answer to. Is if Seattle were to implement the sales tax, would the county be able to add on top of that, or would it just be separate from?
That's a great question. I think that it might be a situation like that. I would have to imagine, though, that the city and county would work with each other so they wouldn't do a double whammy of some sort. But that's a great question because this is open to a number of different jurisdictions.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, I think it's onerous on, again, your average person who's feeling another increase in some sort of, local taxation. On the other hand, these cities and counties should be responsible for the type of, policies they're putting in place. And if they need more prosecutors and public defenders to, defend the policies that they've put in place and created this environment, then it might be fair.
So do you think that they should be able to raise the property tax cap?
Property tax cap is a state thing. Do I think they should be able to? I think it's an argument worth, looking into.
It's just that 1%. You know what I mean? 1% is a pretty stout cap, and cities around the state are definitely looking at this.
Right, cities are, and I know down in Pierce County we're not the same as King County, but sometimes we want to be, and sometimes so until it's in my backyard and affecting me, I might have a different opinion.
Well, wouldn't the property tax be relatively more progressive than sales tax?
Right, right, it would.
What about, here's another thing the legislature did. They capped annual rent increases for most renters at 7% plus inflation up to 10%. So what did we talked at the beginning about that no one was happy with the budget. What about that cap on rent increases? I've heard happy people and unhappy people.
I mean, it was a big priority for the Democratic caucus. Only about 8 Democrats in the legislature voted against it at the end of the day. And now we have a rent stabilization policy, not calling it rent control, because landlords can charge whatever they want between tenants, that matches California and Oregon. Basically, we're saying that 10% per year is the limit.
Yeah,
an exemption for new, not even just brand new, but building. If it's built within the last 12 years, then you have more room to let's see. If it's new construction, then you have
more time to implement it.
To implement this.
Yeah, and this was really interesting. So we're talking about House Bill 1217, and this was a situation where you heard from a lot of landlords, of course, saying, this is onerous, this is going to hurt our housing supply. But this is a bill that's been around for a few sessions now, so I think the legislature was familiar with it. They've been hearing from a lot of different constituents out there who are saying the rent's too doggone high. Maybe they would use a different adjective there. I'm not sure, but I think a few people have been feeling that pinch, and so this was an avenue where originally the Dems wanted this to be a lot lower, but they settled on this number here, 7% plus inflation or 10%, whichever is less. So this was something that was hammered out over several years here. I think not everybody's happy with it because I think Democrats wanted this to be lower, but this is something that at the end of it, there were enough people in agreement with it. They were able to push it through.
There was undoubtedly a ton of negotiation that went into this, between housing advocates, between builders and landlords, year after year after year. They've been talking about some form of this. I always find it fascinating, though, that we cannot bring ourselves to call it rent control. It does control rents, and
it's not a freeze, but control doesn't seem like a wildly
it's
wrong
like
term.
School choice being this trigger word. Why do you get But is it real? If we allow school choice in public, you're allowing it. This is a form of rent control. We should be very transparent about that. And frankly, renters would love the idea of rent control.
I would love my rent to be controlled.
Yes, thank you. But of course, anyone that is a landlord or, I say this jokingly, but has taken Econ 101 knows that rent control has never worked. It doesn't work. I love that we are trying to get creative and trying to, just mitigate the way, but the solution has never worked. And so, this cry from landlords that it's going to, reduce supply really comes from, I think, the builders. The landlords themselves are just going to do what they have to do to make it profitable or stop supplying the house.
I guess what I'd say, though, rent control keeps a rent at a certain level for a number of years. This is something that actually allows rent to be increased. So I don't think it's exactly the same.
It changes it. It caps it. It would be like the property tax cap. It's the same sort of control mechanism, in my opinion.
Okay.
Sure. And one thing about this is that Democrats were clear that if we were going to go down this avenue, we needed to have a lot of bills that are also going to encourage housing supply. And we delivered on those this session with almost I think 12 or 14 bills that are intended to speed up and increase the amount of housing production.
That's a good point. In terms of trying to cut through red tape and get things built, which you'll hear a lot of builders talk about, that was an important part of this session, too, for sure.
Yeah, I would have loved to see more of that in terms of, some of the costs being mitigated that are, just causing barriers for builders, things like the impact fees, things like that. I would have loved to see more of that. I think we did maybe too much in the way of more public housing and trying to offer government subsidized housing, and I think that is a very, very slippery slope.
Well, the Trump administration is coming for housing programs in a big way, so we really almost needed to be doing more of that.
Where's Dr. Carson at HUD these days? It's like a big question mark to me.
So did we did we put the session? I'm going to talk about the governor in just a moment, but did we put the session in a nutshell? B&O taxes going up. That's the biggest item for tax increases, right? Expanded sales tax, capital gains taxes rising.
Yeah.
Right. Estate tax up. We talked about Tesla. That's the big stuff. Yes.
I guess the other shoe to drop is what the governor is actually going to do because he hasn't.
Well, yes.
He hasn't said yay or nay, but this is an important point. I think he's got 20 days since the end of the session, so this would happen sometime in mid-May.
I want to get to. I do want to get to Ferguson. That's the last thing we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
I just want to run through. So spending increases.
Yeah.
We talked about state workers, no furloughs for state workers. Ryan told us about cuts, higher education, behavioral health, healthcare.
We're also going to close an entire prison and 4 reentry centers.
A 55% cut to the abortion access project. That has to do with staffing health facilities and subsidizing patient costs. So they're scaling back on early childhood education. Those are the big stuff. So now, before we take a break, Governor Ferguson. The governor looms over any legislative session, and the governor was, I've heard, tight-lipped. Heard that phrase a lot. Cards close to the vest, close to the chest. I don't know what's the proper.
The vest, so you can
is it the vest?
You can sneak the cards in and out of there if you have to.
Okay,
right.
Close to the vest.
Right.
By the way, you said earlier that doggone was an adjective, and I think it might be an adverb. That could be a separate discussion.
My fault entirely. Thank you. Yep.
But in any case, what do we make of our new governor regarding what the legislative branch did and his ability to line item veto if he wants to?
Doggone it, Bill. I need to comment here. I'm interested to see what happens here because we've got this budget that's somewhere in between $79 million, and there is
Billion.
Yeah, it's billion. Thank you. And what's been set aside as a fund balance is somewhere in the line of $230 million. There's not a lot of pad we're talking about here. So if indeed the governor does follow through with some of his talk, certainly at the beginning of the session, to say, hey, I want to veto that, I want to be careful with taxes, I might veto this, I might veto that, that would potentially throw the budget out of balance, which maybe make some other cuts or whatever else, or he might give it back to the state legislature and say, okay, you figure it out here because this isn't going to work. I will say, I think the work that he has done over the past several months here has been to bring this level down because originally Democrats were saying, all right, we want $17 billion in new taxes over the next 4 years. He was like, forget it. This wealth tax, a problem. That went down to 12 after that. And they said, we need to make some more cuts to that in terms of those increases. It came down to $9 billion after that for 4 years. So I feel like he's definitely had a presence here in terms of bringing down that big number there. Is it enough for him to say, yes, am I okay with this? Or does he, as a first-term governor, say, I'm calling for a special session, forget it, I need you back at the table? I'm interested to see what he does. I don't think we really know yet.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see. He came in kind of, at the last minute. Governor Inslee had already proposed budgets that actually looked at what would need to be cut if we were not going to raise revenue, decided that was not an option for his administration. The governor didn't really have to do that. He just said, I want a 6% cut across the board. And then he's like, well, not equally, but that's what it should translate to. He didn't have to sit down with his team and actually say what that would look like, what we'd have to cut. And so I think it doesn't look like he's going to be making any huge vetoes this year, but I think if he does, it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the fall, kind of around Christmas, when they tend to release that budget for the next year, what he actually does with the first time he has to put together a budget.
Yeah, I mean, I think his early kind of demands that he laid out in his inaugural address were all addressed in this budget. I think legislators were very careful to make sure that happened, to minimize, the possibility of a veto, because I think they believe him that he will veto, things that go against what he has said that he would stand by. That said, he definitely, I think, is in this unique position between Democrats especially, where he is trying to demonstrate his, maybe it's authority is the right word. So I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to line item veto something to, again, throw a bone to Republicans to show, look, I'm being very, particular about this spending plan. I think we made a lot of compromises, but this is what I would have done differently. And I think it shows in some of his recent polling where he's gone way down in support among Democrats and higher among Republicans. They feel like he's listening. He's, being conscious about spending, and we'll see what he does. I do think that we could expect maybe a line item veto just as a show of strength.
I don't know what he's going to do with that. If it is any one of these 5 major taxes that are involved here, that would throw the budget out of balance. There isn't enough room in that fund they've set aside. So he's going to have to be very careful with that veto pen. And the other piece I'll throw in here, too, just as a big backdrop, if you can find me an economic forecaster who knows what's going to be happening in the next couple months, good luck. It's happening at City of Seattle. It's happening with the state, too. There's so much concern about, okay, what are tariffs going to do? Are there going to be some more federal cuts or whatever else? I'm sure that's going through the governor's mind, too. So how do you plan for the very unexpected? That's a big piece of this, and I think that's part of the consideration. Yeah.
I have a feeling as this show rolls on that many of these things are so connected that the Trump administration might come back into our discussion, a possible recession, what's happening with our container shipping. You mentioned hiring police officers. It's a web, really. The Week in Review is a web this time around.
And we're all caught in it.
We're caught in it. We will pluck that web and, I don't know, spinner. We'll unveil our spinnerets after we take a short break on Week in Review.
Stay with us for more of Week in Review coming up just a minute here on KUOW. It's 12:33. It's Public Media Giving Days, and the stakes are high. The president has signed an executive order demanding an end to federal funding for PBS and NPR. It's a credible threat against our work, but public support has always been the backbone of public media. Your support during Public Media Giving Days will help KUOW stay strong, independent, and resilient no matter what happens in the weeks ahead. Every gift to KUOW makes a difference. You can make a gift now at KUOW.org, and thanks. 66 degrees in Seattle's University District. We may hit 70 this afternoon with sunshine all day. Some clouds overnight, and then tomorrow mostly cloudy with a high near 57.
You're watching / listening to KUOW's Week in Review, because we're on YouTube and we're on 94.9 FM. Maybe you're listening to our podcast right now. Do I know how you're listening? I do know that I'm looking at the executive director for the Center for Latino Leadership, Maia Espinoza, next to Seattle Channel host and producer Brian Callanan from Seattle News, Views, and Brews
That's
podcast.
me. Mm-hmm.
And the Urbanist contributing editor Ryan Packer. Oh, and I'm Bill Radke. On with the news of the week. You know, for years, Seattle's been losing police officers, and that has turned around. So far this year, the city's hired more than 60 officers, which is a 6-fold increase from the same time a year ago. And why? Well, Seattle Police Chief Sean Barnes says, well, it's because the department's doing a better job recruiting.
We've shortened the hiring process. We've embraced making more direct interactions with applicants a priority. We've reduced the hiring wait time in half. Thanks to the leadership of our mayor and city council, we are offering generous signing bonuses and salary increases to qualified employees.
Better recruiting, salary increases, signing bonuses. Brian, would you call that a complete list of the reasons Seattle cops are now bringing officers on the force?
I think that's about right. I think having some new leadership in there is an important part of this, too. But yeah, I mean, the big thing that always jumps out to me is the dollars. When you're talking about $103,000 to start for an officer, that's the highest rate in the state. So yeah, I think that's a big piece of this. The city council is really trying to make sure that this is a welcoming place for officers.
How so?
A couple weeks ago, this was a resolution that Councilmember Saka was talking about quite a bit. This idea that defund the police, which didn't really happen.
Never happened.
Didn't happen in the city of Seattle, but there was a lot of talk about it.
Yeah.
And so he really wanted to go to lengths to say, this is dead. We have a new day here. This is what Seattle's all about. We want police to come in, and this is great news for people who want to see more police on the force. I will say I think the dollars are the big piece behind this. I'm interested to see how this factors into the budget, that 0.1% sales tax thing we were bringing up earlier. How's that going to figure in too? But in terms of if you want more officers on the street, Seattle has got it, and this is good news for people who support that.
I think that resolution was a great message, Bill, for Rob Saka. I don't think people who are looking for a job are necessarily checking Legistar to see which resolutions are getting popped up at the city council. And I think it's too early to I know the city wants to claim victory right now, but 60 recruits this year. We've already lost 24 this year alone. And so we don't really know how long these recruits are gonna last and how many of them are gonna stick through to the minimum amount of time to get that signing bonus and then head over to Bellevue.
I wonder that same thing, Ryan. I mean, do the people applying for these jobs, are they hearing these public statements being made? They are important. I mean, and I think they do speak volumes when you have someone on the Seattle City Council making a bold statement that, defund the police is behind us and we support our police.
Why? How does that affect an officer's life?
How does that public statement?
Mm-hmm.
Well, hopefully that reverberates down. I do, though, have reservations that the public sentiment has changed a whole lot. I don't live in the city anymore, so I can't really, speak to what I'm seeing. But did you all see that flyer I circulated with they still have posters around the city that say, don't be a cop, let's fund, services, which is exactly what apparently we meant by defund the police, is fund them less, fund community services more.
But isn't Seattle actually doing that, for example, with the CARE team?
Expanding it to the entire city as of a couple months ago.
This is the team it's not an armed police response,
sure.
but and the city tried to move some parking tickets, sort of transportation related things out of the police department. So it's a thing that defund, in a sense, it never happened. They didn't slash the budget, but the city, a lot of people have, including many police officers, I've heard saying, we're tasked with too many things. Hasn't the city been working on that all along? And does the SPD view that as a bad thing?
I think the city has been working on it. And I guess Councilmember Saka brought this up. A number of officers, even though the city did not do this defunding thing, they brought up in their exit interviews, this whole defund thing, the city council. And so I think this was a message that resonated with some of them. But what you're talking about here, expanding the pool, that's a very important part of this. So I think this expansion of the CARE program, really good news. I think this is something where you have officers who are saying, all right, you know what, maybe I, don't need to be, or I shouldn't, I'm not the right person to respond to this person down in a doorway. They need someone with some social service background, which this CARE team does have. So I think the rubber meets the road, though, when you come to who's going to pay for what. And if we're going to pay for all these police, that's great. What does that leave in terms of dollars for the CARE team or these different services that they're going to put out there? It's not an endless supply of money. I think it's, rather than calling it defund or anything like that, let's be smart with our resources and make sure they're going towards the things that are working. CARE's been working really well so far. They're trying to figure out something where they can actually dispatch the CARE team with it doesn't have to be a dual dispatch. They don't have to go with cops every time. So they can figure that part out and actually get these workers out there right when the 911 call comes in to get out there and take care of an issue so that officers don't have to do that. So they can go to these higher priority calls. Then I think we're getting somewhere. We're not exactly there yet. It's going to come out in the budget process, though, I know, this fall.
Well, the CARE team is still being capped, and we're still funding vacant police positions with money that could be used to fund the CARE team. And so, you talked about the dual dispatch. That's part of the leverage that the police department has that they're not going to be super willing to give up, is sort of this ability to control what happens with the CARE team. If it's fully severed from the police department, there's going to be a lot of pushback over the idea of kind of scaling that up, and while SPD continues to struggle.
Well, what about the issue, SPD, here's another reason that I've heard cited for SPD not being welcoming to officers, is the number of racial and gender discrimination and harassment claims, which went up again this week. So what do you think is behind that, Brian? You've been tracking this more than I have. Do you see a trend? Do you see something that's hasn't changed at SPD?
It's tough to say because each case is different.
Right.
But I mean, we are talking about something over the past couple years here. There have been lawsuits. There were the two this week from two officers who said they were discriminated against because they were black. But over the past couple of years, we've seen 4 female officers saying, hey, there was an issue with us being women, and that kept us out of certain roles. There was a police lieutenant, there was a veteran detective and assistant chief, there was a former candidate for chief, all saying there was some form of discrimination, whether it be race or gender. And that's an important part of this. Even former Chief Diaz, who might have been the source of some of these issues here, he's suing the city too, so saying he was discriminated against. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that, other than I think the city is trying to make some changes with this. When they talk about diversifying the police department, this is a big deal. The people that have been hired by the SPD over these past couple of months here, more than half are people of color. I think they're really trying to do their best to diversify the department. Is it happening yet? No. I think this whole concept of culture change is not the flick of a switch. This is something we've been talking about for decades. And when you read some of the different allegations that are in these lawsuits here, especially from the ones this week, it's not pretty. And it really speaks to a culture change that needs to happen within the Seattle Police Department. James Bible, the person who's representing these two officers, saying this is the tip of the iceberg. There are going to be some more lawsuits to come. So I think the department is in a situation right now where they're going to have to fend off some of these different lawsuits and figure out how to settle those and move forward. They do have a new chief who was very interested in making this happen. They are trying to hire more women, which hasn't worked out great so far. They're really trying to bump those numbers up. But anyway, it's one of these long process type of things that it's difficult to be patient for, I guess.
Okay, well, we'll over time see whether and how this increase in officers changes life in Seattle for better or for worse. So let's take a short break, though, and when we come back, we'll see if we've got time for a little more Trump meets Washington State, and a few other stories we haven't had a chance to mention yet, and a reason to smile, I promise, when we come back on Week in Review.
Support for KUOW comes from Eco Design and Maintenance, family-owned and specializing in start-to-finish exterior design using materials and methods that help to reduce environmental impact. From landscapes to hardscaping, outdoor spaces designed to be functional and long-lasting. More at eco-seattle.com. And from Duration Health, emergency medical kits for earthquake preparedness, international travel, and outdoor adventures. Duration Health kits include prescription-only medications like antibiotics and EpiPen, prescribed in advance by a physician. More at durationhealth.com.
It's KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke with this week's panel, Ryan Packer of the Urbanist, Brian Callanan from Seattle Channel, Maia Espinoza from the Center for Latino Leadership, and we're on YouTube. If you like, check us out there. In Trump Meets Washington news, Ryan, you noted the U.S. Education Department investigating our state's public schools superintendent over the handling of students' gender identity, from teachers asking students their pronouns to transgender girls playing sports. What did you notice about that?
Well, it's just one aspect of the way in which we need to be prepared for this administration to weaponize literally any arm of the federal government to get what it wants. And so we have Chris Reichdahl, the superintendent for public instruction, standing up for trans students in schools and their ability to exist. And the Trump administration is clearly going to try and use any avenue they have to punish us for that.
Maia, you noted that this week a federal judge ruled that President Trump cannot use the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 against people his administration claims are gang members invading the United States. Trump had used a robbery and shooting in Burien as an example of the need to deport Venezuelans to a Salvadoran prison after his administration identifies those folks as gang members without proving it in court. What did you notice about that?
Yeah, I do think that that's going to be a very interesting evolution. I mean, how, interesting that this judge in Texas, a Trump appointee, made this ruling in the first place. I do think it's going to continue to be, worked out, because there is totally an argument to be made here that these gangs are operating as if this is wartime. They have territories, they have turfs, they have enemies, and
We've had gangs for a long time, so how is this more of a U.S. invasion? Are you saying the U.S. has always been invaded in that sense?
No,
like wartime?
No, just the sheer volume that we've seen from some of these countries that are bringing people into the United States. And the argument, I think, it hinges on whether or not they are just operating business and now in the United States, or if they are here to inflict, war crimes. And when you see those things like, I don't remember if it was El Salvadoran or I think it was a Venezuelan gang taking over those apartment complexes. That is like waging war on a territory and trying to take back. So it'll be interesting to see how it continues to evolve. This story out of Burien was insane, if you guys saw it. I mean, talk about, the kind of violence within its own community. This was a Mexican lady being drilled with, through her hands for her PIN number and left for dead on the side of the road. And so it was very interesting to see Trump use that local story here as evidence to why these are gang members that are waging war on Americans.
But isn't that separate from whether the crime is violent? We're talking about the question of whether this is an invasion. You mentioned countries sending people. I don't know that these the people in Burien were sent by anybody, but there's a question of whether this 1798 law should be used as it was for sending Japanese Americans to camps. And then the question of due process for anyone accused of anything, whether it's violent or not, right?
Right. And who's to blame here, where the Biden administration really opened the floodgates and said, essentially, come on in, we're not looking. Now, it's no longer a border crisis. It is a migrant crisis. We have people here that are, waging war on Americans in a lot of ways. But who is to blame here? And does this act, this Foreign Enemies Act, really apply in the way it was intended? This judge in Texas says no. I think we'll see in the appeal what the case is.
And this is a situation where President Trump has declared a state of emergency when it comes to immigration. That's the part of it. And this whole idea of saying this is a war issue and we need to enact this law from 1798, that's where I give a little pause to it, because when we talk about emergencies, we saw that immigration numbers were going down precipitously during the end of the Biden administration. In January, it was basically cut in half from a few years beforehand. So this is something that has been happening for a while. To call it a state of emergency now, I think is a challenge. I know a lot of critics have said this isn't something that's legal, and that's what we're hearing about in court. So we'll see what happens with this one. I'm very interested to see how this court rules on this one, because this could change a lot of different things about what the Trump administration is able to do.
One more Trump-Washington note, Brian. You saw that cargo ship arrivals at local shipping terminals are down about 12% this month from the same time last year. And the Seattle Times quoted somebody saying the number of specifically container ships is down even more. Why do you note that?
I think it's important because there's such fear of tariffs, or will they go in place or won't they go in place. I talked recently with a few different people, including the Port of Seattle, about this. And just the concern is, when you start these tariffs, pause them, maybe start and pause them again, who knows what's going to happen in mid-July when this 90-day pause that the president put in place is apparently up. I'm not sure what's happening then, but I think it's a situation where a lot of these different shippers overseas are scared. They're not quite sure what's going to happen right now. So watching that amount go down is a big deal. It's a big deal for the ports. That's a big deal for our state, because 2 out of every 5 jobs in the state has some connection to trade. We're a very trade-dependent state here. Seeing those numbers go down should be a concern for everybody.
In another bit of news this week, the city of Seattle was apparently planning to hide or downplay some of its concerns about the light rail extension proposed to West Seattle. This is according to our reporter, Ann Dornfeld. Some city staffers read an environmental impact statement that Sound Transit had filed, and they didn't think there were enough protections for people forced out of their homes and businesses, and not enough protection of salmon habitat. And instead of sharing all these concerns with federal regulators, the city decided to send them a much milder and more supportive message, and then quietly send Sound Transit a fuller list of, quote, critical issues.
In a slide deck presentation leaked to KUOW, SDOT officials told other city departments that keeping most concerns hush-hush would be, quote, good for the city's relationship with Sound Transit. That, quote, Sound Transit has expressed a strong preference that the city not submit a public letter challenging or commenting on the federal environmental impact statement, and that the, quote, city's strong comments might be fodder for public lawsuits.
Ryan, you noted that story. That was KUOW reporter Ann Dornfeld. What was your take?
I thought it was really interesting, peek behind the curtain into kind of how these environmental reviews, which dominate all public works projects, kind of progress. It sounds like the city was initially, planning to take a little bit more of an adversarial position with the region's biggest transit provider, and it sounds like there was some walking back of that. The question is whether the issues raised here, like the relocation assistance and mitigation for demolishing businesses and homes along the West Seattle light rail line, are the best to be hashed out during an environmental review. The city of Seattle knows that there's going to be displacement and remediation needed, and is that really the best place? Is it good to have the Trump administration, U.S. Department of Transportation, kind of being the mediator when it comes to the federal environmental review process around what Seattle needs to do to build light rail? I don't think so.
I thought it was interesting that they noted it was to protect the relationship with Sound Transit, the city, between the city and Sound Transit. In the transportation budget this year, another researcher from the Policy Center pointed out that there's some pretty guided language around basically allowing and enabling Sound Transit to be able to bulldoze over city regulations. So that I thought was really interesting when they said, well, we don't want to, tick off Sound Transit. So we did this in this particular way, which, is not well taken.
Well, it's super important. I mean, it's phrased that way, the city's relationship with Sound Transit, but it is critically important that Sound Transit and the city have a great relationship. In terms of bulldozing the regulations, Sound Transit facilities are quote unquote essential public facilities, and which means that they have to be cited. But there's still a lot of things that local government can do to kind of either gum with the works or streamline things along. again, the question is whether these are best for the environmental review process. I just don't. It's become an all-purpose kind of leverage point for pretty much anything.
Okay, coming toward the end of the show, I want to make some time for people to tell me what made them smile. Before that, I did note that the Toronto Blue Jays are coming to play the Mariners next weekend, and we always see a lot of Canucks when that happens downtown and in restaurants. And you see in the stadium, there are at least as many Blue Jay hats.
There's
More, right?
There's totally more.
It's blue.
Yeah.
It's Blue Jay blue at T-Mobile Park. And so, but apparently there's less interest from Canadians in coming down. And I think that a lot of local businesses see the Trump, wants to make Canada the 51st state effect, et cetera, tariffs and all that. So there's a business campaign called Open Arms for Canada, which includes the Fremont Brewing, Kenmore Airs, the Space Needle, a bunch of restaurants, Ivors and others that will be taking Canadian dollars next weekend. And if you don't have Canadian dollars, just show a Canadian ID and you'll get the exchange rate. You'll get the 30% off.
Bring your loonies and toonies. I can't wait. It's one of those things where I think one of the big concerns is just crossing the border. Am I going to get stopped? How long is it going to take? I think that's a very real and present concern right now. If we can get people in, great. But as of a couple of weeks ago, I saw a piece in the Times talking about this. Hotel reservations down quite a bit. So this is going to be a very important bellwether type of a weekend, I think, for this. I'm really interested to see what the numbers say and if this program works. I hope it does, because that's a great rivalry there. And I'm hoping for some good stuff for this weekend for our first place Mariners.
Yeah, first place.
You're saying Canadians are concerned about getting back into Canada?
Coming into the U.S. and then going back into Canada.
That's crazy, because Canadians have always been so much tighter on their border than the U.S. So it's very funny to hear that now Canadians are like, well, I don't know if they're going to let that. I hadn't heard that before. Thank you, Brian.
Maya, speaking of rivalries,
yes.
we're into our section where we talk about what made us smile this week. And you smiled at some rivalry.
I thought it was so cool. The Seahawks are going to be one of the few teams doing these limited edition rivalries jerseys and memorabilia. I thought that was such a cool concept. I didn't know that there was like an NFL campaign to do this, but I'm really excited to see these.
Does that mean certain jerseys
designs
for certain teams, that like the 49ers or whatever?
I think they're going to, design a specific jersey for that rival team that they'll be playing. So I don't know
How
what it's
about the
going to look
opposing
like.
team's logo and then like graffiti on
Exactly.
it?
I can't wait to see it.
Yes.
I can't wait.
Right.
What made you smile this week, Ryan?
Easy one. Car-free Pike Place Market. It's a pilot program indefinitely to close down Pike Place between Pike and Pine. If you want to see a lot of people also smiling, go down there, check out the street. There's some places to sit in the street now. It's pretty amazing.
It helps that they're digging up Pike Place anyway, right in front of Beechers. It's a good time to do it.
Yeah.
But I walk through there every morning. It's a pleasant spot. Yes, Brian.
I am smiling because of all the graduates. They're going to be walking across the stage this weekend. UW's got it going on, Seattle U, City University as well. And then there's a very special graduate at the University of Portland who happens to be my daughter.
Hey!
Emma, you're a rock star. I love you very much. Well done. The rest of your graduates, why can't you be more like your sister Emma? How about that?
I will end with a smile on the fact that this reminded me of you all. The Sound Politics, KUOW's politics podcast, had on a panel of 3 conservatives: the former Attorney General Rob McKenna, Steve Gordon, who's with Gordon Truck Centers and a Republican supporter, Todd Myers with the Washington Policy Center, and so a conservative take on the first 100 days of President Trump. Some listeners couldn't stand it. Some KUOW listeners said, "Oh God, I just turned it off." But the vast majority of people said things like this:
"We have been so divided, and I think that the only way we can start to bridge that gap is by listening to one another and hearing out each other's perspectives."
We have such extremes, either far left, far right. There seems to be nothing in the middle anymore, and nobody seems to be able to tolerate and have an open discussion. And to me, I think that people that overreact are the problem. I was one of those people, so I completely get it.
I am a registered Democrat, but it was great to hear voices from the Republican side and give some insight and kind of just honestly ease my fears a little bit about the extreme of either one of the parties, quite honestly. So I know that you said somebody had already called in or left email saying that the show was trash and they had to turn it off. So there are definitely always opposing voices, and I really appreciated today's show.
Can you relate to that?
Important to listen. Absolutely. I like it when people get information from a lot of different places.
Yeah. That's KUOW's fairly new politics podcast, which I highly recommend. Sound Politics. Check it out. And it's hosted by Scott Greenstone and Libby Dankman. How much of a pro is Libby Dankman?
I am as liberal as you come, and to be able to hear the conservative side done accurately, done fairly, to represent the breadth of the differences between the three guests you had, you did a truly amazing job as a moderator and interviewer, and I want to thank you for the work that you've done with KUOW.
That was some love from my colleague, Libby Dankman, on KUOW. So check out Sound Politics, and thank you, everybody. There's a little podcast called Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Brian, you've heard of that one.
Yes, yeah. I'm the host of that.
Brian
That's me.
Callanan hosts that thing when he's not here, and thank you, Brian, for being on the show.
Great to be here, Bill. Thanks.
At the Urbanist, Ryan Packer, always read your stuff, contributing editor. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, good to have you. And the executive director at the Center for Latino Leadership, Maia Espinoza, thanks for coming up from Pierce County. Good to see you again.
Thanks again for having me, Bill.
Always a pleasure. We want to thank Guy Nelson running the board here, and producer Kevin Kniestedt, and social media help from Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Hans Tweit. I'm Bill Radke. See you next week.
Support for KUOW comes from Real ID 20.